Welcome to Exegetical Tools Basic Greek videos. In this series we're looking at the basic elements of Greek grammar, what you would typically encounter in the first two semesters of Greek. In this video we're looking at the future middle indicative, and you should have already watched the video on the future active indicative. If you haven't, you should go watch that. The future middle indicative is going to be very similar with simply the different endings, with primary passive personal endings rather than the active endings. So instead of oes eomonete usi, you get maisai tai methesthei ontai for the endings. You're still going to have the sigma tense formative. If you look up here, you saw the future tense formative. You'll still have the future active tense stem, the omicron, that's the variable connecting vowel, could be epsilon. But with metha, with the first person plural, you just have the omicron. So lusametha would be this form, the first person plural. And most of the things that we said that apply to the future active indicative are going to apply here. Remember, we're still talking about future time. And remember that there's little or no aspectual feature to or force to the future tense form. That's slightly debatable, but for the most part it just seems like it refers to future time, and the action itself in future time could be going on in different ways, but the Greek verb form may not be able to comment on what type of action it is. It just presents it as being future time. And we're still using the primary personal endings that's used with the present and future tense forms. The secondary personal endings will come later with tense forms that are more past oriented or where they're presenting the action as more remote. What we'll see here is that the future middle is distinct from both the future active and the future passive. So with the present active indicative and then the present middle passive indicative, the present tense stem, the passive and middle forms are exactly the same. They're not separate. But for the future, you do have distinct forms for the middle and the passive indicative. So in this video, we're just looking at the middle. And the tense formative, which is really what's going to help tell it apart from the passive, is the tense formative is just sigma. So let's go down and look at the actual paradigm. Notice that the stem is lu all the way down, as with luo, very regular. The tense formative sigma, the connecting vowel, and the ending. So you get, if you want to say it with me here, sorry, these final forms, we'll say them: lusomai, luse, lusatai, lusametha, lusistha, lusantai. So those are the six forms. You should say them out loud, say the endings out loud, write it out several times. And generally, whenever you're memorizing different forms, what you can do is memorize the first person singular, call that the principal part, and you could learn the first person singular of the present active indicative, present middle passive, imperfect active, imperfect middle passive, and so forth, in all the different stems and voices, tense stems and voices. And that'll give you a sense. Basically, if you know lusomai, you should be able to figure out the third person singular and all that. So once you get to the point where you know all of the tense stems and all the voices and that sort of thing, you can just focus on the principal parts. Another hint or key is to focus on these constituent parts, because if you know that, then you'll be pretty set to be able to figure out all the forms. Now going down to the future deponent, deponent forms go here because they're middle forms with active meanings. As we said before, we had a caveat. Remember the deponent form, some people don't like to use that terminology anymore, but I'm using it here in these videos for convenience sake. So notice poru omai means to go, usually to go, it could mean to come. But it's got the future active stem, poru, it's got the sigma tense formative, the connecting vowel, and then the endings. So you end up with porusomai, I will go. So it looks just like the present active indicative or the present deponent indicative, meaning I am going or I go, but you have this sigma added here. and that's a sure sign in this case that you have the future active indicative. Notice that the connecting vowel being omicron epsilon is very important, because later with the aorist you'll have the first aorist active indicative will be sigma tense formative and alpha connecting vowel. So it's very important that you remember the future active or the future indicative uses the omicron epsilon connecting vowel, so you can distinguish it later from the aorist. So here, just I will go, you will go, she will go. Depending on the context, you might have some sort of progressive meaning. I will be going, she will be going, something like that. Up here, same thing. You can see my translation. I've put I will loose for myself, you will loose for yourself. That's kind of a more traditional understanding of the middle, where there's some sort of self-interest involved in the action. But as I said before, in former videos, the middle form, you just got to look it up in the lexicon to figure out what the actual meaning is. Here I've put for myself to try and distinguish it from the future active of luo, which would just be I will loose. So luso means I will loose, and then the future middle, I'm just trying to make some sort of distinction there in the translation. I will loose for myself. But you just have to look this up in the lexicon to figure out what the actual middle, the meaning of the middle voice is. So do that for each verb. Don't just add for myself or something like that. Okay, so that is the future middle indicative. So that includes the actual middle forms and also the deponent forms. So work on these paradigms, get them down, and hope this was helpful. See you in the next video.